If you're having suicidal thoughts or feelings or feel like you have no hope, please call 988. There, you can talk to someone who not only cares about your story, but cares about you. Please reach out today. Thomas P. Murphy once said, "Minutes are worth more than money. Spend them wisely." At Minutes Wisely, we take that to heart. Our mission is to decrease veteran suicide by providing life-changing experiences for veterans, first responders, and Gold Star families. We believe that we can make a lasting impact by rekindling a sense of purpose and fostering community through sponsored tickets to sporting events. These experiences are not just about the game, they're about the moments that can change lives. A simple sporting event can boost joy and instill a sense of renewed hope and purpose for those who have served. Join us in making a difference, become a moment maker, and empower a veteran with rediscovered hope. Visit minuteswisely.com for more information and to get involved. Together, we can make every moment count.
Good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Tomorrow Needs You. Today we're here with Dr. Taylor. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, my pleasure, man. Thank you for coming on. Usually we start off like, let's introduce yourself, like who are you, where you grew up, and that kind of stuff.
Well, as I introduced myself in federal court, I'm Dr. Colonel Chief Roy Taylor. So I've got a doctorate in criminal justice. I retired after 24 years as a military police officer at the rank of lieutenant colonel from the United States Army Reserve, and then I'm an active chief of police in North Carolina. Grew up in Ohio, entered the military. I graduated high school in 11th grade, went into the Air Force, law enforcement specialist, military working dog. Did that for my 4-year enlistment, came home, got on a police department, and been with it for the last 45 years.
Oh, that's interesting. How was it working with the dogs?
Best partner you can have. They don't complain about your driving. They don't care what radio station you listen to. And as long as you feed them something, they don't care where you stop to eat.
What kind of dog did you have?
A German Shepherd. I had a Belgian Malinois before people really knew what they were, before they became popular in police work. But primarily, I had a couple of Shepherds.
Yeah, I have a Shepherd right now. He was his breeder uh, mainly does police dogs, so I got to learn a lot about them. They're a handful if you don't know how to handle them.
They are, and they have to have a job. You have to have something for them to do all the time, or they're going to get to be destructive. And I got away from shepherds because of that 2 coats of fur. I got tired of chasing those tumbleweeds around the house all the time. So now I have a Airedale Terrier.
Oh, yeah, right on. So at what point did you go to college? You said you joined and you enlisted.
Yeah, I was, like I said, I graduated high school in 11th grade. I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, and the guidance counselor wasn't much help. They told me I had to be on the honor roll and I had to have a senator's recommendation. So I knew I could work harder and get on the honor roll, but the senator recommendation thing was something for rich kids. I didn't know how to go about it, and of course we didn't have the internet back in the 70s. So if it wasn't in the World Book Encyclopedia, you really didn't know much about it. So anyway, I worked hard, got through school, got out a year early, and I just didn't feel like I was mature enough to go to college. But I was the state wing commander for Civil Air Patrol. And so I was really comfortable with the military. So that's how I ended up in the Air Force. But while I was in my last year in the service, they came out with a program called SPACE, and it stood for Security Police Academic College Enrichment. And it gave the same class 3 times every day. So you had a morning, afternoon, or evening class, and it was the same. So no matter which schedule you were on, you were able to attend training. But that didn't happen until my last year, so I didn't get very far. And then working on a 2-year associate's degree. It took over 8 years to. That was weird. Never had that happen before.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I hate to mess up your broadcast,
That's
but
okay.
anyway, it took me 8 years to get a 2-year degree because I was on a police department working rotating shifts, and by the time I finished that, I'd been a police officer for over 8 years, and I started working on a bachelor's degree, and then I became a police chief while I was working on the bachelor degree.
Awesome. What where where were you at when you were a police chief?
My first job was in a little town in eastern North Carolina called Bladenboro in Bladen County. It's pretty close to the coast. And then from there, I went to a little larger agency, Norwood, and that was closer to Charlotte. And then to Liberty, which was near Greensboro, a little bit bigger. So each time I moved, I went to a little larger agency. And then from there, I went to Governor's Highway Safety to manage all the law enforcement programs on occupant restraint and driving while impaired. So, and then I went back into being a police chief at the state psychiatric hospital.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I have what it takes to be a police officer, man. Like, there's so much disrespect in this country. It's unbelievable.
It is. It's very shameful, and we were just talking about the situation in Minneapolis, and that basically started because of people being disrespectful to ICE, and but it you know escalated and turned into a shooting where a 37-year-old U.S. citizen was killed. And now I'm really afraid that because of all the political rhetoric, it's going to end up being another George Floyd type of incident.
Yeah.
So I've really got my fingers crossed and hoping that doesn't come to play.
Yeah. I saw a little bit on it just before I came on today, and from my understand, a lady tried to run over an officer.
Right. That's the rhetoric part of it. This lady was a watcher. And so they would go out and watch ice and film them, that type of thing. And she was blocking one of the travel lanes in a road. She was had her car stopped at an angle. And right at the beginning of most of the videos, you see there was a car that went by, and then the next vehicle was a dark gray Tundra pickup truck, and it came up with flashing blue and red lights on it and stopped. And two of the ICE agents got out and approached the lady. And while they were trying to get her out of the car, they told her to step out, and she wouldn't do it. So they reached in the vehicle to unlock the door. And another ICE agent moved over and was standing on the left corner of the vehicle. And so she put it in reverse, trying to back up to get away from the officers, cut her wheels to the right, and started pulling forward. And that's what, the officer drew his gun before she even put it in drive. And as soon as it started moving, he fired 3 rounds. But, people are saying that he got ran over. He didn't get run over. He might have got nudged by the vehicle, but she wasn't trying to run him over. She was just trying to elude them. And he was in the way, and he fired his weapon. Police officers, and I'm a firearms instructor and a use of force instructor, we train the officers. You don't stand in the way. You get out of the way. And unless they're chasing you with your car, intentionally trying to use it as a weapon, you don't shoot at it, because what happened is what we worry about. He fired 3 rounds. At least one of the rounds struck her and killed her. Now that vehicle is a 3,000-pound unguided missile, and it smashed into two other cars. Well, what if it would have been a bus stop with school children there, or a pedestrian, or people were in those cars, or oncoming traffic? And it just creates a dangerous situation when all he had to do was, move out of the way. But he didn't get run over, and he walked on down to the crash site. And after they, determined that she was unconscious, he walked back to another vehicle. He wasn't injured. So for people to say that, that he was, run over, he wasn't. He got out of the way. But anyway, it's, again, like I
Yeah.
said, the rhetoric of it is that she was a domestic terrorist and ran him over, and he was justified in shooting. And it's
Yeah, that's what I was seeing. It's crazy how they twist these stories and put all that rhetoric in there.
It is, and that's what's sad. The news media should be fair and honest, and leave the politics out. If you want to watch the talking heads, that's fine. But in the real world news, it needs to be like it was when we grew up, and you know they just reported it, and then you got to decide for yourself. what you thought about it and what you believe. But now it's, well, the Democrats are saying this and the Republicans are saying that. And I mean, it really, when I was interviewed on the news media about it out of Minneapolis this afternoon, I said, this is a training issue. We don't train officers to shoot into moving vehicles because of the danger it provides. And also, it wasn't a deadly force situation because they knew that she was not there to do them harm. She didn't make any threats to do any harm. All she was doing was disobeying and trying to move away. And I'm sure that they could come up with a federal law about hampering law enforcement operations or something. But in reality, what is she doing? She's violating a Minneapolis or a Minnesota state law by blocking a road, and I don't know that ICE agents, well, I do know ICE agents don't have the authority to enforce state law.
So, yeah, so, when something like that happens, like, what's the next step? Do they take the officer's gun away? Do they handcuff them? Like,
It's whatever their protocol is. Typically, in a shooting situation, we take the officer's weapon or let them keep it till we get them into a safe location, back to up the police department or something like that, because they may need to protect themselves. You don't know what's going to happen in between the crime scene and where you're going to do the interview. But there should be an internal investigation by the ICE leadership, and then there should be an investigation by the Minneapolis police because it's a homicide committed in their jurisdiction. And then the results of that criminal investigation need to be submitted to the district attorney, and then they'll decide whether or not to pursue criminal charges. And then the internal investigation, we call those Garrity investigations because the officer has to tell the truth because his testimony won't be used against him in a criminal court. It's only used in administrative hearings. So there should be a Garrity investigation to determine if he followed their policies and procedures and that the use of force was either within policy or outside of policy. So it's two separate investigations that really should go simultaneously.
yeah, how do you you mentioned the George Floyd. How do you think that went? Like, do you think the officer was at fault? Your personal, I'm not asking like professionally, personally. I
Well,
don't wanna put you on
I
the spot
think that
because we hear both sides.
oh yeah, and I'm, believe me, I'm a very fair and
Yeah,
because as a police chief, you got to treat everybody professionally and fairly. But I think Chauvin, he was doing a technique that we were taught back in the older days, and he was you control the body by controlling the head, and if you have the head pinned down, then it can't go anywhere, and the body can't go anywhere. But the things that people don't know, one, two of those officers were rookies. I mean, they were fresh out of the academy, they were in their field training, and they're just standing there watching it go down, and it looks like, okay, this looks like what we're trained in the academy to do. And the next thing you know, they're arrested and they're sitting in federal prison right now, and they didn't have a month on the job. Chauvin, they say that he used a chokehold. It wasn't a chokehold. It was just basically you put pressure on the back of the neck, right in the shoulder area, to keep the person pinned down. But they don't know is that when they first arrested George Floyd, they tried to put him in the back of one of their Explorers. He got in there and he said, "Look, I'm claustrophobic." He said, "I just can't be in these things. I'm going to go crazy. I just can't do it." So they took him out and put him on the ground, and it called for a paddy wagon, a van, to transport him. So I mean, they were really being humane, trying to accommodate his needs to take him to the police department. And unfortunately, they put him in that hold. And I tried to call Fox News right after it happened when it was breaking news to talk about what happened because unfortunately African Americans have a high propensity for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and you put any pressure on somebody's back, you got them laying down on their chest, you got their hands behind their back, it makes it difficult to breathe, and you've got a probably 180 to a 200-pound man pushing down on your upper chest area. it's going to cause respiratory distress. And I wasn't going to say anything about the possibility of illegal drugs or anything else, but just physiologically, it's difficult to breathe. And then if you look at somebody that's got health problems, it's only going to exacerbate them and cause death. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, Chauvin didn't go into that situation wanting to kill anybody. Those two rookies
Right.
didn't know any better. And I think it's a travesty all the way around. It's certainly sad that somebody died, but it was even worse that it caused so much upheaval in our country, and the Black Lives Matter movement came out, and it's just those are the domestic terrorists, or those type of
Yeah.
groups, and their only purpose is to undermine our government and cause fractions in our society.
Yes. So I don't know, I'm trying to wrap my head around why he was thrown in prison if that's how he was trained.
Well, it was interesting that, I'll say it. Judge Janine was, one of the commentators on Fox that day, and she's yelling and screaming, "Why aren't these officers in prison?"
Yeah.
Well, if you're a judge, you would know that you don't go straight to prison. You get arrested, you're charged, you're given, the opportunity for bail in most cases. And these, if they're going to charge him with a homicide, they wouldn't give him bail. But, he's going to be in the county jail until he meets the conditions for release or till his trial. So anyway, there was just so much, again, rhetoric about what was going on that I felt it was necessary to try to get the truth out there. At least what happens from a real police procedure world view. Not, again, nothing to do with racism or political agendas. Just how are police officers trained, and what are some of the consequences and why, and how can they be remediated against. So now there's been more training about keeping people off of their chest, immediately get them into a sitting or standing position as soon as you get them in handcuffs, because that's going to take that pressure off the chest. If you get them setting up and leaning against a patrol car or sitting on the curb or sitting in a chair, it's going to be a lot easier for them to breathe. And these cardiac arrests or respiratory arrest situations aren't going to be as prevalent as they are. So unfortunately, that death was tragic, but it also helped move law enforcement along again by reminding them to, do the proper procedures so that people don't end up suffocating.
Yeah. And kind of wish there was something like we could do about the judge just, running her mouth without knowing any facts, Like, why would you go on TV and run your mouth and you don't know anything yet?
All right.
You're a
And
judge. You should know better than that.
exactly. And now she's the regional judge for Washington, D.C. Something she's back on the bench now, or back as a prosecutor. So I'm sure she's knowledgeable, but that day she, certainly didn't know what she was talking about. And that's like the talking heads today, Kristi Noem saying this was an act of domestic terrorism. And they had several other people on, Fox News that were talking about how the officer had to defend himself, and that was, justified shooting. Well, they're not police procedure experts. They're not firearms instructors. They're not use of force instructors. So,
Yeah.
and most of them had never been a police officer. A few of them had been, special agents with different agencies. But again, how many people do they ever arrest? When I was on the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, every year the training officer would have me help him train all the FBI agents on how to handcuff people. And the first year I did it, I said, "Well, why do you need my help? Why are we doing handcuffing training?" He said, "Well, most of these agents have never arrested anybody in their life, and they certainly haven't put handcuffs on anybody. So that's why we do an annual recertification and refresher training. So in case they do, they'll know how to do it." And I said, "Oh, makes sense." But the federal people just don't make that many physical arrests, and when they do get arrest warrants, typically they call the local police department that has jurisdiction to assist them in the service of those warrants. So even then, they don't handcuff anybody. So, and a lot of times, they don't really use their weapons that much either. So, again, even if these people have some real law enforcement experience, they may not have actually been in these type of situations where guns are drawn and bullets are flying. So that's why people like me in this career field, I look at things from a training aspect and a policy aspect, and both of those aspects come from case law. So if we look at Tennessee versus Garner, a U.S. Supreme Court case, it says when feasible, officers should use a warning before firing a weapon, before they use deadly force. In a situation like this, you really don't have time because it only took a couple seconds and it was over. But then we look at Graham versus Connor, which says the actions of the officer will be viewed from a reasonable officer perspective in the same circumstances with the same level of training. And that's what really needs to be done is, okay, if I was in that position, I wouldn't have wasted the time drawing my gun and pointing it at the car and then firing it. I would have been moving out of the way so I didn't get struck. And then maybe run into my patrol vehicle to, do a vehicle pursuit or something else. But to use deadly force in that situation, just in my opinion, based on the information I know, was not according to what our protocol typically is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of great points there, especially for the people like me. All you do is see it on TV, and then the talking heads are saying one thing, and kind of lead you down this path, and that's not the path at all.
Right. Because, certainly I would agree with them that, the officer has a right to protect himself. But, if you remember from your military days, is a handgun going to stop a motor vehicle? No. I mean, even most rifles aren't going to stop a motor vehicle. So why are you shooting at it?
Right.
And then if you do kill the operator, now we've turned it into a 3,000-pound missile, unguided. And we don't know where it's going to stop. The physics are going to react. Eventually, it's going to hit something that's immovable, and hopefully, that's not some people in between it and that unmovable object. So um, that's why we have these policies. That's why we have training, is so that the officers know what to do in these situations, and that's why realistic training is important, so that you got a different mechanism for them to learn and to ingrain those policies and procedures into their daily routine, so that they don't have to think about it because you really don't have time. But drawing a weapon and firing 3 rounds isn't really going to stop that vehicle from running you over.
Yes. Man, these police officers, man, they're really in a no-win situation a lot of times.
It
When
is.
you're out there doing your job, and one wrong move can cost somebody their life or your freedom. Like, next thing you know, you're in jail.
It is. It's difficult, and I certainly give them every you know ounce of reasonableness in their actions. I try to look at it from their perspective and what would I have done in that same situation, and then what are the policies and procedures regarding those type of situations. So again, that's where really training comes down to be the best guarantee of success, because otherwise we can read the policy, we can stand there and lecture to them, but until they actually have some hands-on physical experience, it really doesn't sink in all the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a lot like the January 6th thing. You have two different sides, and each side is spinning it completely different. You know, uh,
Right.
who do you believe?
You're right, but I don't think anybody should ever storm the Capitol. I,
Definitely not.
I can't fathom that, and especially for people who are saying they're on the conservative side. We look at the conservatives as typically more law abiding and more for our country, but on that day they certainly weren't. And I had friends that were there, and I said, "What the heck were you doing going up there? I mean, that just doesn't make sense." And how many thousands of people, came to that rally and then went on down to the Capitol just amazed me that they had that kind of turnout. But then for them to breach the perimeter and then breach the building itself and go in, I just thought was very unpatriotic.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I agree 100%.
So, and a lot of those people, they were rightly convicted, and President Trump pardoned them. I had a few cases that came out of that as an expert, where one guy was overcharged. He threw a M80 firework into a area where the police were staged, and one of the officers, they arrested this guy, but they charged him with bringing a weapon of mass destruction and detonating an explosive device. I mean, all these very serious felonies would give him, decades in prison.
Yeah.
Was he wrong? Yes. Did he do something he shouldn't have done? Yes. Should he be punished? Yes, but not over punished. Again, it has to be measured.
Yeah. And I wish they would take the pardon thing away from presidents. And like the judge gave them laid their ruling down, so let it be. I'm not a fan of the pardons at all.
No, because they got in there. A jury of their
Yeah.
peers found that they committed a crime, and they were sentenced by the sentencing guidelines, and they need to serve it out.
Right, exactly. It's kind of like when Biden pardoned his son for whatever.
Well,
it's like you have a blanket pardon.
That's what I was going to say. He pardoned him for crimes that they don't even know about yet, and several other people. I said, "Well, give me one of those. I'll take it." So,
Yeah.
but you were saying it's about it being hard on police officers, and it is, and that's one of the reasons that recruitment is down, because we saw in all the George Floyd riots how police officers were injured and how disrespectful they are toward them. And I'm a faculty member for one of the local colleges, and teaching the master's program in criminal justice there. And they only have 8 students in the graduate program because people just aren't interested in the career. We have the Raleigh Police Department's 100 officers short. The Wake County Sheriff's Department's about 50 officers short. So minimum manning standards is about what the norm is right now. And for my police department, same thing. I just can't find qualified applicants to fill the role. And then there's so much competition for those good applicants that they can write their own ticket with sign-on bonuses and pay. I mean, I started as a police officer full time in 1986 for the high wage of $17,000, and now somebody starting today is starting almost at $80,000. So to me, it sounds like that's a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
I had police chief jobs that didn't pay $80,000.
Yeah. I was gonna say I'm in IT, man. I wish I could have started off at 80,000.
I think we all do.
Yeah. Uh,
Where did you serve? What branch?
I was in the Navy
Okay.
in the mid '80s. I was on an aircraft carrier, USS Carl Vinson.
What do you think about our flotilla down in Venezuela?
Man, that's another strange one, man. So I will say what they did the other day was extremely impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I agree on going in and snatching somebody else's president or for whatever reason, like I don't know about that, but I'll tip my hat to the military though.
Yeah, Delta Force is not to be reckoned with, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean they definitely put the rest of the world on notice. That's for sure.
Yeah, but there's so many facets that we really can't know. And in my opinion, we did have warrants, for Maduro, and we can go in
Right.
and serve them. So, I think that was a legitimate thing. But I had one of my friends say, "Oh, they were in it. It was surgical. They didn't kill anybody." I said, "What are you talking about? They killed at least 80 people." I
Yeah,
mean,
80 people.
well, they were just when they were on the way. I said, "No, they killed Maduro's entire security detail. They bombed all the radar sites. They bombed all their anti-aircraft weapons, and they used electrical warfare to knock out their electrical grid. So we know at least 80 people were killed in the operation. So don't say that it was a surgical. It was surgical, but it wasn't like Osama bin Laden when they got in and got out and really didn't kill anybody other than him. So that was the difference there. But the issue I have, and again, as an officer, we're trained on the law of war and what we can do and what we can't do. And if you want to designate the drug boats as narco terrorists and that we can use military force against them, okay, I don't agree with it, but we'll do it. But when you have people that survive and they're floating,
Yeah.
hanging on to the boat, you don't do a second strike. You go in and rescue them and either charge them criminally, which is the right thing to do, or like they did with a couple of the guys that they did fish out of the water, they repatriated them. So,
Yeah.
but how does that look? To me, it looks like, well, we really don't have the authority to do it. Or otherwise, why didn't we bring them back to stand trial in the United States?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have to be better than everybody else. That's what America is. We're better than everybody else. So to go back for a second strike and take somebody out that's hanging out on the side of the boat waving for help, I mean, that's just flat out murder, if you ask me.
Yep, me too. And again, but you get people on the far right that's, oh, they were calling for help and they had radios. I said, no, they didn't. I mean, these guys probably didn't even have a radio on the boat. They didn't, and if they did have a radio, they probably didn't know the international distress frequency, and their boats, blown up, so the power is probably out. I mean, they don't have any way to do it.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
but again, that's part of that rhetoric. I just believe tell the truth. And if you mess up, take on the ownership of it, and repent and pay your
Yeah.
penance and go forward.
Exactly. Yeah. Now he's talking about taking Greenland. Let's just
That doesn't
watch
make
that.
any sense to me at all either.
What?
What did Greenland do to us? I guess it's just because of the minerals. So
Yeah. So now you're just proving you're what you are,
yeah, it's pretty sad. And I look what's happened to the military, and in some ways it's great. I mean, I agree. In the Army when I got out, soldiers going through basic training, if they didn't even have to pass the PT test to graduate. They could get a 60% or
Yeah.
so and then move on and then take the test later. I mean, that's not the way I was raised in the military. You made every standard or you didn't graduate. You got recycled and given another chance. And if you didn't make it, then you were booted out. So we don't need people that can't, handle the physical part of it or the height and weights. Like when I deployed to Iraq, each one of my height and weight failures and my PT failures, they fell out on missions. So it told me, there is some relevance to these
Right.
tests and standards, because if you're outside those standards and you fall out of the mission, now you've just degraded the mission and you're causing it to be more dangerous for the other soldiers, because now they've got to look after you. And then we would have to, come back and pick them up on the way back, because usually we left them out at a cache, combat area surgical hospital or something for medical treatment. But yeah, you got to have standards and you have to enforce the standards. So, and having, esprit de corps is important as well. But
Yes. Of course. Yep. Yep. Yeah. I'm in agreement with you 100%.
so it's interesting that what's coming about. And I don't know. I worry about World War III, because you got China. I mean, look at the kind of equipment they're building, hypersonic rockets, stealth aircraft carriers, stealth aircraft, Generation 5 aircraft. I mean, their weapons systems are, getting very sophisticated, and they're building a lot of them. So why? They're
Exactly.
looking for a showdown one of these days. And
Yes, they are.
it's gonna not be we're not gonna be exempt from shedding blood on our soil in the next one. We're not gonna be
Correct.
having the Pacific and the Atlantic between us. So they're gonna be denial of service. So there was not going to be any internet. There's not going to be any electricity. So once we don't have that capability, you know, society is going to unravel pretty quickly, because of there's no way to get food. There's no way to get money. There's no way to get fuel. Everything is dependent on the internet now. I mean, you saw it progress. Back in the beginning of your career, we still had typewriters and file cabinets full of forms, and today
Yes.
you couldn't even talk on the phone if the internet's down, because it's all voice over IP. So
Yeah. Go. Hey, listen. the internet goes down, go try to buy a candy bar from their gas station.
Mm-mm.
I ain't doing it.
No, one of my police departments is in the western part of North Carolina, and we had Hurricane Helene come through, and we were just devastated because our radio system, we're in a mountainous area, so we've got repeaters up on the top of the mountains. Well, the power went out, and I think our UPS system was only good for about 8 hours. So once it went out, we were without radios because we couldn't talk anymore. Our phones were voice over IP. They were out. Cell phones, the towers were down, so there was no cell phone communication. I just told them, set in the police station. If somebody comes for help, go help them. But roads were collapsing, and said, don't be out there because you have no way to call for help and tell us what your situation is. So at least
Right.
if you're sitting in the building, I know where you're at.
Yeah, I lived in I'm from Detroit, Michigan, so I lived up there when the power went out. I don't know if you remember that. Like 3 entire states, the power went out in that area.
What year was that, roughly?
It was probably like my 2 daughters were younger. We were camping, so it's probably in like the mid '90s, just before 2000.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Entire grid went out, and you couldn't even get water. It was crazy.
Yeah, and that's what'll happen. And people I talk to say, "Oh, well, I'll just grow a garden." Well, how long does it take for that plant to generate food, and how many times
Yes.
are animals going to eat it before it ever even gets big enough to produce food? You're going to be dead. You'll be starved to death by then, and
Yep.
there's only so many animals to go hunt. So when you got the entire society out there hunting, it's not going to last very long. But did you ever read a book called 1 Second After?
No.
If you get a chance, if you're interested in that, it's a fictitious tale, but it's about an electromagnetic pulse weapon on the United States. It centered around Black Mountain, North Carolina, where the story comes from. But it gives you a lot of good ideas about how to survive. And 1 second after, it takes you from the second after the EMP knocks everything out through 1 year. So how did they manage living for 1 year in that environment? So it was interesting. And the foreword was written by Rumsfeld. And at the time when I read the book back in the early 2000s, it was after 9/11. It's probably about 2005. I read it, and I knew about electromagnetic pulse weapons because of a classified RAND study.
Yeah.
And I read that book, and it's talking all about them. Rumsfeld's talking about them. I said, what's he doing talking about classified information for? But I think it was in that book where he said that there are 25 unwinnable scenarios on Congress's shelf, and EMP is one, and they just had to cut it off at 25. There's actually more than that. It's just they limited it to 25. So we're not as strong as we may believe we are, and we have to have that self-reliance to be able to survive.
Yes. That's why I think it's important that Americans have firearms and not surrender them to the government.
Yeah, exactly. I was the full-time provost marshal in Virginia for the Virginia National Guard for 8 years, and it was during the Obama administration, and there was talk about government seizures, and I'd be out eating downtown in uniform, and people would come up to me and say, "Are you going to come and take my guns?" And I said, no. Why would you think that? Why would you think we would come and get your guns? And I remember telling the adjutant general he wanted us to go out after one of the snowstorms came through, and wanted our soldiers to go out in Humvees and pull into people's driveways to check on them. And I said, just be careful, sir, because a lot of people think we're going to be coming for their weapons. And if they see a military vehicle and a couple guys hop out, they may get shot at. So I'm not sure that's a good course of action. So I don't think we ever did do it. But yeah, political tensions were high because of that type of rhetoric about us coming to seize weapons. But I agree. One thing that I would like is that everybody have to go through a weapons training course just so that they understand how dangerous guns are and how far bullets travel, and how destructive they can be. And just the 4 cardinal rules of gun safety. Treat every gun as if it's loaded. You don't point it at anything you don't expect to destroy. You keep your finger outside the trigger guard until you're ready to shoot. And You are aware of what's around and beyond your target because that bullet may overpenetrate or you miss.
Correct.
So,
Yep.
but so many people don't want it in a lot of states, even North Carolina. We've had an open carry law forever in North Carolina, but when they were talking about the constitutional carry, they were wanting us to allow 18-year-olds with no training to carry a weapon concealed. And of course, the argument would be, well, they can do that in the military. I'll tell you, the most anti-gun place I've ever been is in the military. If
Exactly.
you're a young soldier, are you allowed to have a gun in your barracks? No. Are you allowed to
Yep.
run around with that gun? No. When do you get that gun? Well, once a year when you go to the range, you get to hold that gun, and they give you a
Yep.
class on which is the dangerous end, which is not the dangerous end again. So even the military has very strict rules because they understand that, at that age, at 18, 19, 20, I mean, men especially just aren't mature enough and do immature things and
Yep.
alcohol fuels issues.
Yep. I
So
was
you,
gonna say they drink a lot on
yeah,
base.
exactly. So, even in the war, when we were in Iraq, I mean, there was pretty tight, weapon control. And most of the time, our weapons weren't even loaded when we were on a fob. You didn't load the weapons till you went through the gate. You relied on the QRF and, the stationary guards. But, we had ammo and magazines. It just, rule was you cleared your weapon when you came on and you didn't load it up until you were through the gate.
Yeah. So not too long ago, there's been in recent years, there's been mass shootings on military bases,
Hmm.
and I've heard people saying, "Well, how could that be? It's the military." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you don't understand.
There's no
When you're on
guns.
base, you're not allowed to have a gun. You're not
Nope.
allowed to have a weapon on base."
Nope.
I've
You'll be in the brig real quick.
Oh yeah. So it's like, yeah, it's like shooting fish in a barrel,
Yeah, that was down in Georgia, was it Fort Jackson? I think where that it was over it was domestic violence related, and the guy brought in the gun, and then the major in Texas that was a terrorist. He snuck his weapon on that 5.7 that he killed a lot of people with. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's the sad part. People think the military's got guns and bombs and everything all over the place, but everything is really very very
yeah,
tightly controlled.
correct. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we store the weapons. The bolt and the weapon are even separated. So if you were able to get into an armory and get your hands on a gun, it isn't going to work. You don't have the components because they're locked up somewhere else in a whole different safe.
right.
So, we take all the precautions to prevent that. Actually, one of the cases I worked when I was on the Joint Terrorism Task Force was a guy that was writing letters from prison to his friends about how they were going to go uh, rob one of the National Guard armories and take the weapons and go on a bank robbery spree with these automatic weapons. So, of course, all the mail is censored. And they said, hey, when Jim Bob gets out, he's planning on coming to your armory to rip it off. So he ended up getting charged again and didn't get out when he thought he was going to get out. But people think about it.
Oh yeah, yeah. So you've been in both the military and a police officer, and so I'm pretty sure you have to deal with a large amount of anxiety and stress in your life. What do you do personally to deal with anxiety and stress?
For me, exercise, helps relieve a lot of it. And then, having friends that you can, be open and honest with and talk to about whatever you're going through. And like most of us probably, it always has to do with the opposite sex and a relationship you're in that's not going the way you want it to. And one of the sad jobs I had was provost marshal, and right before I transitioned from the guard to the reserve, I had 6 soldier suicides that I had to investigate. And all 6 were males that did not never deployed. They were just traditional guard soldiers, one weekend a month. But every single one of them shot themselves with a pistol because of a relationship. One was a married guy that was split up and having custody issues, but the other 5 were all 25-year-old, 25 to 28-year-olds that shot themselves because their girlfriend had dejected them. And that just showed me that, we need to have better resilience training or better ways to help people learn how to be resilient. And my book is titled "Being a One Percenter." I write about how to be resilient and how to, overcome those, type of adverse situations, and just continue focusing on, your path and how to get there. So for me, I've always found that, just again, good communication with people and exercise has been the thing. And, I've got a small amount of PTSD. I mean, some people are just built to you do certain jobs, but when I smell antifreeze, I think about all the dead bodies I pulled out of wrecked cars because I always smelled at every fatal accident antifreeze, blood, and alcohol. And so when I would smell antifreeze, it would remind me of those people that died because of drunk driving. And that's really the only thing that kind of triggers, you know, my PTSD. But then again, it's just kind of a thought and sadness about those people that died and shouldn't have. But as far as you know, being involved in a war, and I won the Bronze Star with Valor for saving one of my contractor drivers' lives in a deliberate enemy ambush. So it was nice to be given an award for saving a life instead of taking life, and during
Right.
a war. So anyway, I've seen lots of dead people. And another hard thing to do in law enforcement is to come and tell some family that their child's not coming home because they were killed in a car accident. So even today, even though I'm not out on the road and deal with it very much, I hate prom season, because what happens, these high school kids are out partying, all dressed up, get into the liquor cabinet, go out, have a couple drinks with their girlfriend, and you know, they're not used to driving impaired, and it doesn't take much to get them impaired. But well, a lot of them don't come home after that, and knocking on some family's door at 1 a.m. They collapse and start bawling before you even open your mouth. They know. They just
Yeah.
feel it. They know something's wrong. So that's something you never get rid of either. And kind of like in the military, being a casualty assistance officer, that's a I've only had to do that once. And you get a special bond with that family because you're going through the grief with them that
Right.
their loved one's not coming home.
Yeah. So what are we gonna learn as a society that drinking and driving is so bad? I mean, uh, getting a ride is so easy today. You just pick up your phone and do a ride share, taxi, call your mom, call your dad, call your sister, call your girlfriend. Like I like how do we get past this?
Well, what's our bigger problem right now is the legalization of marijuana and all the candy and edibles and drinks with THC in them. Back when we were young, there was only about 7%, 7 to 13% of THC in marijuana. Now it's up into the 80s, 90%, and so it's becoming almost a hallucinogenic drug that people just don't know how to handle it, and they think, well, it's legal, and I can drink a
Yeah.
drink or eat some candy so there's no odor and then go to work. Well, there's all kinds of statistics now about work related injuries, and it's the same thing with automobile crashes. These are impaired drivers, and they're impaired on THC, which is kind of like a depressant where it slows down your ability to react. It doesn't allow you to focus, and both of those are skills that when you're driving an automobile you need. You got to be able to react quickly and be aware of your surroundings.
Yeah. And how many times have you ever heard the argument? Well, nobody ever died doing marijuana.
Oh well, they have today. They
Yeah, like
thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people have died. And so I don't really agree with it being a Schedule One drug on the federal schedule, because that's where the Schedule One drug is drugs that don't have any medical value, and that's where heroin is. But
yes.
in North Carolina, we've got a separate section, and it's always been that way. It's not because of the new fad, but we have a Schedule Six, and so it allows it to be a misdemeanor, you know, instead of a felony. So I think if they want to lower the punishment a little bit, that's fine. If people, it's just like drinking. If you want to drink, I mean, I like bourbon just like everybody else does, and a couple beers with pizza or wine with spaghetti. I mean, I'd have a couple drinks every few days. So but I don't go out and drive, and I don't carry a gun. I know what I'm allowed to do and what I'm not allowed to do, and I don't want to lose everything I've worked a lifetime to gain through one careless mistake of getting behind the wheel after consuming something that's going to impair my judgment. And that goes, when I teach my firearm safety classes, I tell people, look, if you're taking medication and it says on the bottle, do not operate heavy equipment, that means do not operate a gun either. That means you leave that gun home in the safe, because what that drug is telling you is it's going to impair your judgment. So
Right.
don't take that warning label lightly. Don't think, well, I'm not a heavy equipment operator. Well, if you carry a gun, you've got something that takes a lot of responsibility and a lot of judgment before you pull it out.
Yes. Owning a gun is a huge responsibility.
Yeah, I enjoy it, and I used to enjoy competitive shooting. And just today, I bought a VR virtual reality set. It's called Ace XR, ACEXR.com. But not that I'm advertising for them, because I haven't got it yet. But everything I've read about it's good, and it gives you people that like to do marksmanship type of fundamentals. It gives them that opportunity without actually having to put a bullet down range. So you can go into your living room or game room and do a competition by yourself. And I guess there's even online groups where you could compete against other people, but you pick the type of weapon you want. And it's supposed to be accurate in weight and trigger pull and trigger reset. All those type of things are supposed to be the same as the real gun, so that way you get real tactile experience and practice reloading, all that type of thing. So I'm excited about it. And and that's what I'd like to see, is more people that practice. And I just yesterday I saw an article in the news where some kids were playing knock knock zoom zoom, at night, and somebody came out of their house and shot one of the kids. And
Yeah, I saw that.
yeah,
Oh my God.
so I mean, people just don't understand. The only time you can use that gun is when you reasonably believe your life or the life of somebody else is in danger of death or serious bodily injury. And we define serious bodily injury as any injury, if left untreated, that may result in death. So if that's not there, that gun needs to stay in the holster.
Right.
But it's unfortunately, people pull them out. Oh, he stole my lawnmower out of my shed. They shoot him. Or he was in my pickup truck going through my stuff and I shot him. And no, you know, you shouldn't have ever shot him. You shouldn't have ever pulled that gun out. And that's why I think a national mandatory training would be nice. And if you're going to carry concealed, like I use my dad, who died of Alzheimer's and had been a police officer. I mean, he carried a gun since the '60s. From the time I grew up till he was impaired with his dementia. He could always carried a gun, and when he died, he still had a valid concealed carry permit. But we just, took away the guns and the car keys, and never let him have access to them ever again. But the purpose of saying that is there's no control, and so people that are no longer physically or mentally fit to carry a gun can still carry it legally. So it should be like a driver's license, where if you're requested to take a test, or every so many years you have to take a test, it makes society a lot safer.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's a lot of things that we can do that's not trying to trample on the Constitution. I'm a big constitutional supporter. I mean, that's my bread and butter, is the Constitution. And all the case law, like I said, that determines how police officers act, is all through the Constitution. So I'm certainly a big proponent of it, but I also think that we need some guardrails to help society stay safe.
Yeah, I think just having a wide open Second Amendment's crazy.
I was surprised. I was kind of hesitant when the concealed carry things first started, and really, it's done a lot of good. I mean, it's prevented a lot of crimes that never get reported. It's saved a lot of lives. So I think responsible gun ownership is a great thing, and I think with some proper training and some rules to warrant when you have to qualify or whatever. Because in North Carolina, you only have to fire 30 rounds, and you fire them from the 3, 5, and 7 yard line. 10 rounds at 3, 10 yards at 5, 10 rounds at 7. I could do that, backwards, blindfolded. So it's not really much of a challenge, but they only have to do it once in your lifetime, and then as long as you don't get in trouble with the law and pay your renewal every 5 years, you keep on carrying. But I'd love to see them have to come back and requalify, even if it's only that qualification course. It would still allow the instructor to see, okay, is this person physically and mentally able to still operate this weapon? And if not, then they could say, well, sorry, you didn't pass, and I'm going to submit this paperwork to the state, and either you're going to have some training, or you may not be able to carry a gun again.
I
And
hear you.
Tennessee's a pretty conservative state and pretty big on open carry and all that.
Yes.
And you don't have income tax, so it's a great place to live.
Yes. And the weather's nice. It was
It was 75 here today.
70 degrees. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
January 7th.
Yeah, it sure was. I enjoyed it. I was outside. My brother actually works right outside of Nashville, so he's over there. So we still get to go to Tennessee. And then one of my commands when I was in the Army Reserve was in Nashville, Tennessee. So I had to go to drill every month for a couple of years when I was the commander in that unit.
Yeah. There's a lot of military in this area, that's for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of military, especially here. We're not far from Fort Bragg, and then you got Camp Lejeune, you've got Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. So we've, and of course, Fort Bragg, home of the 82nd Air Force Airborne, and then of course Delta Force is out of Fort Bragg. So we're a big military community here as well. Good VA, very lucky to be close to the VA for medical stuff, and then we got Womack Army Medical Center for stuff on the base if you need to go in there.
Yeah. A lot of people complain about the VA. I'll say I just started using the VA probably 6 months ago. I've been super impressed by them.
I've not had any bad experiences at all, and it's just the service has been great. I think they've been very good on customer service. I think the only thing that's a little confusing for me is just about how to make appointments, because you got to dial the main number, and then you got to know what extension you're looking for. And I mean, and it's not like a 3 or 4 digit extension. It's like a 5 or 6 digit extension. And so that's about the worst I can say. And then if you turn in a travel voucher, you can even get paid for going to the doctor if you want to.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Every time I go to the doctor, they send me a check for like $9.
Mhm.
Like, hey, all right.
Yeah, I just stopped. It wasn't worth because I probably live probably 10 or 11 miles away from the VA hospital. So it's not worth my time to stand in line and fill out the travel voucher. And
Yeah, it's weird because I've never filled it out
no,
because they're like, hey, you're fill this out for travel. I'm like, I don't need travel. And then like 2.5 weeks later, I get a check from them. I'm like, the hell did that?
yeah. Unfortunately, that $9 won't even buy a McDonald's meal.
Right.
So they got
Hey,
to get it up a little bit for us.
So we're right at about an hour here, but I always like to give my guests, a few minutes to talk about what they got going on, what you want to promote. And I know that you have a book, and I think you said you had a podcast. You want to talk about what you got going on here?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Now I started a podcast. I've done 12 episodes so far, and it's called Internal Affairs with Dr. Roy Taylor. And I look at cases that I've worked as an expert witness over the past 12 years and talk about, how the police responded to the situation and how it unfolded. And about 80% of my work is for the plaintiff, which means that I'm going against the police and pointing out, how the police officers didn't follow the Constitution, or how they violated somebody's rights, or how the procedures were fallible. But it's all for the benefit. It's not trying to degrade the police. It's trying to encourage them to be better and to educate them, because I had one officer one time in a deposition that had made some pretty fatal flaws in whatever the situation was. And he said, he goes, well, they told me in the academy that they're trying to shove 50 pounds of shit in a 25-pound bag. So obviously some of it's going to fall out and you're not going to remember. And that's what he was using as an excuse, you know. And that's no, I mean, yeah, we can't retain everything we're taught, but we have to, you know, do the best we can. We have to know what resources are available for us so that we can make sure we do the right thing, or what supervisors, or you know, how are we going to make sure we do what's right and lawful. But that's what the podcast is about. And I realize that a lot of people, you know, you might have heard of the Miranda warning. You know, everybody hears on TV, you know, you've got the right to remain silent, but you don't know where it came from or how it evolved. And there's a lot of other case law that I would talk about, like Graham versus Connor and Tennessee versus Garner, Terry versus Ohio. And I thought, well, I'm going to switch gears with the podcast, and I'm going to do it, make it educational for the next 7 or 8 episodes, so that I explain what the constitutional law is and how it affects law enforcement. So that way, hopefully, it educates my listener, and so they have a better understanding of what I'm talking to them about. But I'm looking forward to doing something like you're doing, getting a guest on there. So maybe if I find somebody that wants to come on and we can talk about the Minnesota shooting and, you know, things that are kind of controversial, and have a nice dialogue that'll keep people interested. I think that'll be more entertaining, and maybe even better educationally. So we'll see. And then my book I wrote is called Being a One Percenter, because a number of the things that I've done in my life, only 1% of the population does. Only 1% of the population has a PhD. Only 1% of the population's ever served in the military. 1% of the population in the law enforcement. 1% of the population are airplane pilots. So I've done all those things. I said, well, you know, I'm a 1%er. I'm not a outlaw motorcycle gang, but I'm a person that's done a lot of things that only very few people ever do. So, you know, by telling my story and how I, you know, reached the goals that I had for myself, and, you know, the life it's allowed me to lead, you know, I hope that I can encourage other people to, you know, be successful as well, because I came from a blue collar family in Ohio. My dad worked at the Ford Motor plant in Lorain, and he was a part time police officer, and, you know, had a good upbringing, very, very good home, and, you know, had a good school system. And like I said, I just didn't get the right encouragement to help me go to the military academy. You know, if I would have, I mean, life would have been entirely a different trajectory. But you know, I took what I had, and at the time, my goal was I wanted to be a police officer. And back then, police officers didn't have college education. I mean, if you had a 2 year degree, you know, that was something. That's usually what the police chief had. If you had a bachelor's degree, that was really something back then. Um, Kind of a side note, one of the cases I worked not long ago was out of Pennsylvania from 1939. And it was a case where a young man was committed to a state boys um, detention home at the age 14 for arson. 4 years later, he ended up killing a matron at the school. He stabbed her 53 times. But he was African American, and he was tried, convicted, and 3 months afterwards, he was electrocuted, killed uh, through the electric chair. And of course, they said that he wasn't 18, that he was not of age, that they killed him. And anyway, but 90 years later, the family is petitioning the governor for a pardon. And the governor wrote this really heartfelt letter about, you know, how the injustices of the past and how racism affected things, and blah, 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 basically apologizing, and signed it. Well, guess what they did as soon as they got that in their hot little hand with the pardon? They sued. And so I had to represent the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as an expert to explain. You know, they had a law professor who said that the police didn't use proper techniques, that they were improperly trained, that they were improperly supervised. I said, those are all 21st century concepts, or later 20th century concepts. Police officers didn't even have any type of academy until 1974. So in 1939, they would have said, "Hey, Rich, you want to be a gun-toting policeman? Yeah, here you go, buddy. You show up tonight at 7 o'clock and ride around." I mean, there was no policies, procedures, and in 1938, the Pennsylvania State Police had just started an academy for their officers, but it wasn't available to anybody else. But anyway, the purpose of saying all that is that modern law enforcement really isn't that old. So, and really, other than Terry versus Ohio, every major Supreme Court case has been during my law enforcement career. So it's changed dramatically in the past 45 years that I've been affiliated with it. So, but that's my book and that's my podcast. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and just have a good general conversation. And it's good to find people that see the world the way I do, and or at least are reasonable enough to listen to another
Right. Yeah.
perspective. That's all I ask for. You can disagree, but I can say, well, most of everything I know is based on some facts and some knowledge of the situation. A little bit of it's based on personal opinions, but I try not. I'll tell you, if I say something, it's pretty much gospel. If I tell you I think, then it's opinion and not necessarily nestled in fact. But I try to be fair and impartial, and respect everybody's rights, and just wish our society could get along and live a nice, peaceful life.
Right. Yeah. That would be nice.
Yep. But if those that don't want to act right, then we do have the police, and we need to make sure we are, obedient. Even if we disagree, we can wait and fight it out in court. It's never right to fight it out on the street, because you're going to lose and you're just going to make the situation
Right.
worse. So I always tell everybody, that if you feel like you have a complaint, get everything finished up. The next day, go back and file a formal complaint with the police chief or the sheriff, and wait for your day in court to explain your side of it as well. So it can work out peacefully that way. But you like the lady today that got killed. She was trying to drive around the officers, and it cost her life. So that's just how serious of business it can be.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it all works out up there.
I do too. Just keep your fingers crossed that it doesn't erupt into another, George Floyd type of riot
City burn.
situation. So I'm going to be interested to see what happens overnight.
Mhm.
But the governor, Walz has already said that he gave the National Guard a warno. So they're packing their gear tonight and probably sitting there waiting by the phone. If I was the commander up there of an MP unit, I would tell my soldiers, go ahead and come on in. If we got drill coming up, we're going to go ahead and do a mute of 4, get our gear ready, get our vehicles TI'd, ready to roll, and we're going to stand by.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, we'll be praying for them up there.
Absolutely.
All right, Dr. Taylor, I want to thank you for jumping on with us. Stick around for a second after I hit the stop button, just make sure everything is kosher. And until next week, everyone, thank you for tuning in.